You're useless. My CEO husband roared at me in front of the entire boardroom. Suspended! The room stopped breathing. I could feel the eyes of 20 executives boring into me. His new COO, the woman who betrayed me, was smiling. The next morning, he swaggered into the office. Ready to apologize, he found me sitting at his desk. When our legal team walked in, his face went white. "Ma'am," our lawyer said, "shall we begin the transition? My name is Alara Vance, and I am 36 years old. As the co-founder and chief financial officer of Summit Logistics Group, the 30th floor executive boardroom in our Chicago headquarters was as familiar to me as my own home. But as I pushed through the heavy glass doors for the quarterly shareholders meeting, the air was wrong. It was sharp, sterile, and cold. Every conversation didn't just stop. It felt like it was severed, mid-word. 20 pairs of eyes, the most powerful investors and executives in the city, turned to me. The whispers that followed were low, like the sound of sand grating on glass. At the head of the long mahogany table, my husband, Marcus Thorne, stood tall. At 38, he was the charismatic CEO, the face of the empire we had built. But he was not looking at me. His attention was fixed on the woman standing a little too close to his right, Serafina Hayes, the brilliant, sharp-edged COO he had personally recruited from a Boston competitor 6 months ago. She met my gaze for a fraction of a second, her expression unreadable, before turning back to Marcus with a look of supportive deference. I took my seat at the table, my usual spot to Marcus's left, and opened my leather-bound notebook. The chill in the room was a living thing, settling onto my shoulders. Marcus cleared his throat, the signal for the meeting to begin. "Thank you all for coming," he started, his voice resonating with the practiced confidence that had charmed billions in capital. He launched into the opening slides, his voice a smooth baritone outlining our quarterly successes. But I could feel the tension in his shoulders, the rigid set of his jaw. This was not his usual performance. Then, he stopped. He clicked the remote, and the screen went blank. "Before we discuss projections," he said, his voice dropping, "we must address a serious internal matter." A collective intake of breath. The room became utterly silent. "It has come to my attention," Marcus continued, finally turning to look directly at me, "that our most ambitious new expansion, Project Helios, has been the target of deliberate and malicious sabotage." He let the words hang in the air. I felt my blood run cold. Project Helios was his pet project, a massive, risky gamble I had internally advised against. "Sabotage, Marcus?" I asked, my voice steady, though my heart was beginning to hammer against my ribs. "That's a strong word." "It is," he spat, his boardroom mask cracking to reveal the rage underneath. "And the facts are undeniable." He clicked the remote again. A new slide appeared, displaying a chain of emails. My emails. "This," he said, pointing a laser at the screen, "is a direct communication from our CFO." He said the title like it was an insult, "Inexplicably delaying crucial payments to our primary logistics partner in Hamburg. A delay that has cost us millions and put the entire European expansion at risk." I stared at the screen. The emails looked real, but they were not. The dates were skewed, the wording subtly twisted. They were a fabrication, a clever one, designed to paint me as either grossly incompetent or actively destructive. "Marcus, that is not accurate," I said, leaning forward. "Those payments were staged according to the risk analysis I presented last month. You approved—" "I approved nothing," he roared, slamming his hand on the table. The sudden violence of it made several investors flinch. "I see now that your risk analysis was nothing more than a smokescreen. You were trying to kill this project from the inside." The heat rose in my face, a deep, burning flush of humiliation. He was doing this, here, now, in front of everyone. Serafina Hayes stood beside him, her expression a perfect mask of concerned shock, but I saw her eyes. They were glittering with victory. She had done this. She had engineered this. "Marcus," I said, my voice dangerously low, "you are making a grave mistake." "The only mistake," he said, stepping away from the table, "was trusting you." He took a deep breath, puffing up his chest as he delivered the killing blow. "Ilara Vance is suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation into her conduct." The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the HVAC system. Suspended. He had used that word. I looked at him, truly looked at my husband of 7 years, the man I built this company with. I saw a stranger, his eyes cold and devoid of any recognition, and I saw her, Serafina, allowing the smallest, almost imperceptible smirk to touch the corner of her lips. My face was on fire, every nerve ending screaming from the public execution, but beneath the shame, a different kind of fire was igniting, an icy, precise anger. I slowly, deliberately closed my notebook. I picked up my tablet. I did not rush. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I stood up, straightening the lapels of my suit jacket. I met Marcus's triumphant glare. "All right," I said. The single word was clear and sharp in the dead silence. I turned my back on him, on Seraphin, on the stunned faces of our investors, and walked toward the glass doors. The sound of my heels on the marble floor was the only sound in the room. As I walked out, my loyal assistant, Ben Carter, scrambled from his desk, his face pale with panic. "Mrs. Vance, Ilara, what's going on? They can't." He followed me into the private executive elevator, the doors sliding shut and encasing us in polished steel and silence. His hands were shaking. I took a deep breath, the first one that felt like my own, and the burning in my cheeks subsided, replaced by cold resolve. "Ben," I said, looking at my trusted, terrified assistant, "don't worry." He looked at me, confused. "Be at my lawyer's office at 7 a.m. tomorrow," I instructed, my voice flat and final. "Bring the backup email server, the one they don't know about." The elevator doors slid shut, and the manufactured silence was deafening. My assistant, Ben, was vibrating with anxiety beside me, but I stared at my reflection in the polished steel. The woman looking back at me was pale, her face burning, but her eyes were dry. She was a stranger. The woman I knew, the woman who built this company, was 7 years in the past, living in a rented loft in Lincoln Park. Summit Logistics Group was not born in a high-rise. It was born on a scratched dining table in a dusty, sun-filled apartment with faulty heating. It was born from my mind, my strategy, and my money. I was the architect, the one who saw the gaping inefficiencies in global freight, the one who coded the initial routing software, and I was the one who funded it, signing over $2 million from my family's trust fund without blinking. Marcus, back then, was the rocket fuel. He was magnetic, the best salesman I had ever seen. He took my complex models and my financial projections and spun them into a narrative of revolution. He was the face, the voice, the undeniable charm. I was the brains. We were, I thought, the perfect team. I remembered the days we worked 18 hours straight, fueled by stale coffee and the sheer adrenaline of building something from nothing. Our executive dinners were not at steakhouses. They were takeout boxes of pad thai eaten on the hardwood floor, leaning against a sofa we found on the street. We were too exhausted to move, but too excited to sleep. We celebrated our first $1 million contract by splitting a warm beer on the fire escape, looking out over the city lights, and he kissed me, his eyes bright with a future I truly believed we shared. "You and me, Ilara," he had whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "We're going to own this city." Our wedding was just as practical. We did not have time for a grand affair. We went to the courthouse on a Tuesday, with Ben and our first accountant as witnesses. I wore a simple white dress. He wore his best suit, and we were back in the office by 4 o'clock to close a deal with a German distributor. That night, sitting across from each other at our cluttered desks, he raised his coffee mug to me, and I felt a surge of love so profound it almost hurt. We were partners. In everything. The shift began 8 months ago. It was subtle at first, like the first drop in barometric pressure before a storm. It started with Serafina Hayes. Marcus had announced her hiring as our new chief operating officer at an all-hands meeting. I was standing at the back, and the smile on my face felt frozen. He had poached her from a major rival in Boston. He had done so without a single strategic consultation with me, his CFO and co-founder. When I confronted him later, he was almost giddy, like a child with a new, shiny toy. "She's a killer, Ilara," he'd said, dismissing my concerns about her aggressive reputation. "She thinks big. She's not afraid to break things." What I heard was, "She's not like you." From that moment, everything changed. Marcus, who had once been grounded by my data, was now intoxicated by Serafina's buzzwords: global expansion, legacy, aggressive scaling. He no longer wanted to build a sustainable company. He wanted to build an empire, fast and loud, and he wanted his name carved onto it. My financial projections, the ones that had always been our North Star, suddenly became an annoyance. My warnings about cash burn and over-leveraging were met with impatience. I remember the exact moment I knew we were in trouble. It was 6 weeks ago, in a strategy meeting. He and Serafina were pitching Project Helios, the reckless European expansion. "Marcus, the numbers don't support this," I had said, keeping my voice calm, pointing to the data on the screen. "We're looking at a potential cash flow crisis within 6 months if we don't hit projections that are, frankly, imaginary." He didn't even look at the data. He looked at Serafina, who gave him a small, supportive nod. Then he turned back to me, and in front of our entire executive team, he laughed. "Everyone," he announced to the room, his voice dripping with condescension, "please bear with Ilara. She's the head of our brakes department." The room filled with nervous, sycophantic laughter. I felt the blood drain from my face. He had reduced me, his partner, his wife, the architect of his success, to the brakes. I was no longer the engine. I was just the thing slowing him down. The elevator chimed, the doors sliding open to the ground floor lobby. The memory of that laughter, that utter humiliation, snuffed out the last ember of shock. All that was left was a cold, hard certainty. He called me the brakes, but he had forgotten one crucial thing. The brakes are the only part of the machine that can stop a crash, and I was the only one with the power to deploy them. Serafina Hayes was 30 years old, and she was a masterpiece of corporate armor. She was never seen in anything other than a severe, impossibly expensive designer suit. Her dark hair was always pulled back into a bun so tight it seemed to pull at her features, emphasizing her sharp cheekbones. She was brilliant, that was undeniable, but her intelligence was a weapon. When she looked at you, her cold, pale blue eyes were not connecting, they were scanning, assessing, and dismissing. Her effect on Marcus was immediate and absolute. She was a professional sycophant, a mirror reflecting back all his grandest, most dangerous ideas. Where I offered data-driven caution, she offered breathless validation. That's not just a plan, Marcus. She would coo in leadership meetings. It's visionary. The competition is too slow to even see the field, but you are already playing chess on a different board. Suddenly, I was not the pragmatic co-founder. I was the negative one. I was the voice of can't in a room where she was the voice of now. The shift was swift. First, our shared CEO-CFO sync, a calendar event that had been sacred for 7 years, began to be rescheduled by his assistant. Then, strategy meetings began appearing on his calendar that I was not invited to. I would walk past his glass-walled corner office and see them, heads bent together over blueprints for the European expansion, Serafina gesturing with sharp, confident hands, Marcus nodding, looking more energized and alive than he had in years. I was no longer the other half of the brain. I was just an obstacle. The true, insidious nature of her attack became clear 2 months ago. Ben handed me the preliminary slides for the quarterly investor deck, the ones Serafina had pre-drafted for Marcus. I stared at slide 12. It was titled Key Market Opportunities in the EU. It was my work. It was my 3-week-long, agonizingly detailed risk analysis of the German logistics market. But she had inverted it. My bullet points, which read, Critical Risk Union-Based Port Strikes, had been reworded as Opportunity Leverage Localized Labor Disputes for Entry. She had stolen my analysis, stripped it of all its caution, and presented it as a roadmap for aggressive expansion. She was taking my intellect, my labor, and claiming it as her own, all while painting me as the pessimist who could not see the opportunity. Marcus, meanwhile, was completely enchanted. He was captivated by her audacity, her youth, and the relentless way she affirmed his ambition. She was telling him he was a legend, a titan, and he was desperate to believe her. It did not hurt that she was, by conventional standards, beautiful, but it was her worship that he was truly addicted to. I tried, one last time, to reach the man I had married, not the CEO I worked for. I cornered him in the private parking garage, away from the eyes and ears of the office. Marcus, she is reckless, I said, my voice low. Serafina is not just ambitious, she is dangerous. She is presenting my risk models as opportunities. She's going to drive this company straight into the ground. He stopped, his hand on the door of his Tesla, and let out a long, impatient sigh. Ilara, I am so tired of this. Tired of what? I asked, stunned. Tired of me doing my job. Tired of your negativity. He snapped, his voice echoing in the concrete garage. She's hungry. She's fast. She gets it. You know, I thought you were just being cautious, but now I see it. You're jealous. Jealous? The word was absurd. Marcus, this is our company. My money is personally guaranteeing our credit lines. I am not jealous. I am protecting us. He looked at me, his eyes cold, all traces of the man I loved gone. No, you're just not a fit for the high-speed culture I'm building. You've lost your edge. Ilara, maybe it's time you just focused on the checkbook and let the visionaries handle the future. He got in his car and drove away, leaving me standing in the exhaust fumes. That was the last time I tried to warn him. From that moment, I was purely the CFO, and as the CFO, I approved the executive expense reports. That is when the final piece clicked into place. The microaggressions in the boardroom were one thing, but the corporate credit card statements were a confession. They started 2 months ago. Dinners for 2 at Alinea, for client relations, on a Tuesday, $4,000. Consulting cocktails at the Aviary, for 2. Team-building lunches at RPM Steak that lasted 4 hours. And the car services, a private town car, billed to the company, picking Serafina up from her apartment and dropping her, not at the office, but at our penthouse. They were not just planning a corporate takeover, they were having an affair, and they were using the company I had built with my own money to pay for their dates. The following week, they made their move. Project Helios was formally presented at the executive leadership meeting. It was not just a proposal, it was a coronation. Marcus and Serafina stood at the front of the room, a tag team of manic energy and gleaming white teeth. The presentation was slick, all sharp graphics and aggressive buzzwords. Blitzkrieg expansion, first mover advantage, total market saturation. Project Helios, as they described it, was a rapid simultaneous launch into 3 key European markets, Hamburg, Rotterdam, and London. It was to be funded by an extremely high-leverage loan secured against our existing domestic assets. I sat, silent, my face impassive, as they painted their fantasy. They spoke of legacy, of $1 billion valuation, of dominating the continent. Marcus was in his element, the charismatic preacher selling salvation. Seraphina was the high priestess, providing the sharp, technical-sounding justifications that made the fantasy feel attainable. When they finished, there was a beat of stunned, excited silence from the other VPs, who were already imagining their new European titles. Then, Marcus turned to me. And now, our CFO, Ilara, will walk us through the financial approvals. He was smiling, but it was a challenge. This was the arena, and he was handing me the sword, expecting me to fall on it. I did not smile back. I nodded to Ben, who dimmed the lights slightly and brought up my presentation on the main screen. It was not slick. There were no graphics, no buzzwords. It was just black and white. It was numbers. "Good morning," I said, my voice cutting through the residual excitement. "I have run the requisite financial models on Project Helios, based on the projections provided by the COO's office." I let the first slide sink in. It was a burn rate chart. As presented, Project Helios requires an immediate capital burn of 40% of our total liquid reserves. It also projects that we will not be cash flow positive in the new markets for at least 18 months. I advanced the slide. However, the projections provided are, in my professional assessment, dangerously optimistic. They assume a 300% increase in market share acquisition, quarter over quarter, in a market where we have zero brand presence. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every executive. I ran a more conservative, realistic model. The next slide was a stark red line, plunging downward. This is our cash reserve. If we hit realistic projections, which are still aggressive at 30% growth, the high leverage loan payments will outpace our domestic revenue. We will be insolvent in 6 months, not at risk. We will be bankrupt. Project Helios, as it is structured, is financial suicide. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. The excitement had evaporated. Seraphina was the first to speak, her voice like ice chips. "Thank you, Ilara, for that timid assessment." She stood up, walking to the front so she was physically between me and the screen. "What Ilara is showing you are the numbers of fear. She is showing you the why not. We are showing you the how to. To achieve market dominance, you cannot be afraid of the balance sheet. You have to command it." She turned to me. "You are looking at this like an accountant, Ilara, not a builder. You are deliberately trying to kill this project because you lack the vision to execute it." The accusation hung in the air deliberately. "I am looking at this," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "like the chief financial officer, whose legal, fiduciary duty it is to prevent this board from bankrupting the company I built." "Exactly!" Marcus shouted, his fist hitting the table. Everyone jumped. He was red-faced, his charisma gone, replaced by pure, ugly rage. He pointed at me, his finger trembling. "You built this company has outgrown you. You are a relic, a naysayer, holding us all back with your spreadsheets and your duty." He stepped toward me, his voice low and menacing, a public humiliation intended to break me. "We are moving forward with Helios. Every person in this room is either on board with the new vision or they are off the team." He looked at me, his eyes dead. "Ilara, get on board or get out of the way." The entire room looked at me. This was the moment. This was the loyalty test he and his lover had engineered. They expected me to fold, to be the humiliated wife, to protect my marriage over my integrity. I looked at the budget approval document on my tablet. It required my digital signature, the final key. I closed the tablet. "No," I said. Marcus stared, momentarily stunned. "What did you say?" "As CFO, I cannot and will not sign off on the Project Helios budget. It is fiscally irresponsible, it violates our loan covenants, and it is a breach of my duty to our shareholders. I am exercising my authority to block the allocation of funds." It was my last legal move, my final act of power as CFO. Marcus's face went from red to a terrifying, pale white. He looked at Serafina, and in that moment, in the flash of panic and then cold calculation in her eyes, I saw the truth. This was what they wanted. The project was not the goal. My refusal was the goal. They had not been trying to get me to sign. They had been trying to get me to say no. They needed a reason to remove me, a justification for the coup, and I had just handed it to them. The taxi did not take me home to the penthouse I shared with Marcus. I would never set foot in that place again. Instead, I directed the driver to a pre-war gray stone building in the Loop, the kind of place with a rattling elevator and floors that creaked. I let myself into a small, unmarked office on the 4th floor. The frosted glass on the door simply read, E.V. Capital Consulting. I had secretly maintained this space for 3 years, a fallback, a listening post, a bolt hole. It was my one contingency in a life I had foolishly allowed to become entirely merged with my husband's. I did not turn on the lights. The city's afternoon glow was enough. I walked past the simple desk and knelt before a large, fireproof safe hidden behind a framed map of the Chicago freight yards. My fingers, steady and sure, spun the combination lock. The mechanism clicked, and the heavy door hissed open. Inside were backup drives, emergency cash, and a passport, but I reached for the most important item, a thick, leather-bound document. Summit Logistics Group Original Shareholders Agreement. My mind flew back 5 years. We were in a glass conference room, desperate for our Series A funding. The venture capitalists were wary. We were growing, but we were burning cash. They wanted more collateral than the company itself could offer. They wanted a personal guarantee. They wanted me. A $20 million line of credit, the lead investor had said, his eyes on me, not Marcus. Secured by the guarantor's personal assets. In full. Marcus had been vibrating with excitement, practically kicking me under the table. Yes, of course, he'd said, speaking for me. Whatever it takes. I had agreed. I pledged my entire family trust fund. The $2 million I'd used to start the company and the $20 million more behind it. But my own lawyer, a hawk I had retained personally, insisted on adding a single non-negotiable addendum, a failsafe. I flipped to the back of the agreement, to Appendix B, and there it was. Clause 11.4, the Fiduciary Breach and Control Transfer Clause. Its language was cold, precise, and beautiful, because I, Ilara Vance, was the sole personal financial guarantor for the company's primary credit. My executive role as chief financial officer was intrinsically tied to the company's survival. Therefore, any attempt by the CEO to suspend, terminate, or otherwise remove me from my operational duties without irrefutable proof of malfeasance presented during a mandatory 30-day arbitration hearing would be considered a catastrophic and immediate breach of fiduciary duty by the CEO. The consequence was not a lawsuit, it was automatic. The clause stipulated that such a breach would immediately trigger a non-reversible transfer. All 50% of Marcus Thorne's voting shares would be nullified, and their full voting and ownership rights would be permanently absorbed by the guarantor. Ilara Vance. The justification was written in stone, to protect the corporate entity and its assets from the direct threat of compromised and negligent leadership. I remembered Marcus, impatient and giddy, waving his hand at the addendum. Legal nonsense, he had laughed, grabbing the pen. Who cares about Appendix B? We got the money, Ilara. We won. Shh, he had signed it without a second glance. He had just given me the $20 million. Today, in that boardroom, he had given me the company. I stared at his arrogant, looping signature. He had set the trap himself. I was just closing it. I pulled out my secure, encrypted cell phone. I dialed a number I had memorized for just this occasion. It rang twice. Hartman. The voice was, as always, clipped, professional, and devoid of emotion. Mrs. Hartman was the chief legal officer of Summit Logistics Group, a corporate bulldog whose only loyalty was to the company's charter, not to its CEO. Mrs. Hartman, this is Alara Vance, I said. I am formally reporting an event that has triggered Clause 11.4 of the original shareholders' agreement, a gross fiduciary breach by the CEO, Marcus Thorne. There was a half-second of silence on the line, not for shock, but for processing. Define the breach, Hartman said. He publicly suspended me from my duties as CFO in the quarterly shareholder meeting, in direct violation of the arbitration protocol. Another half-second. I understand. The mechanism is clear. What do you want me to do? I looked out the window at the SLG tower, my tower, dark against the setting sun. Activate it. Now. My personal office was just a staging ground. By 7 p.m., I was in the main conference room at Gable and Stone, a 48th floor fortress of glass and dark wood overlooking the Chicago River. This was Mrs. Hartman's world. She had assembled a tiger team of the firm's most ruthless corporate litigators. The mood was not panicked. It was surgical. The language of 11.4 is ironclad, Hartman said, her glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the original document under a bright task light. The breach is clean. The transfer is automatic. Our job tonight is to ensure the execution is so total. He has no ground to stand on. For the next 5 hours, we worked. We were a machine. We drafted the emergency injunctions, the formal transfer of share ownership papers, and the immediate notifications to the Securities and Exchange Commission. We prepared the resolutions to be ratified by the board, which, by morning, I would control, and the legal notices of termination. We were not just disarming him, we were dismantling his entire power structure. The notification protocol is key, a junior lawyer said, his face pale in the light of 3 monitors. All electronic, all simultaneous, I said. I want him, his new COO, and every single member of the board to receive it at the exact same moment. No one gets to warn anyone. Hartman nodded. 12:01 a.m. The moment today's breach is officially yesterday's news. Across the river, at Gibson's, the air was thick with the smell of seared prime-aged beef and expensive perfume. Marcus and Serafina were in the main dining room's most prominent booth, bathed in the warm, amber light. A bottle of 1998 Dom Perignon sat between them in a silver bucket. Marcus raised his glass, the champagne catching the light. To the future, he said, his voice loud enough for nearby tables to hear, and to Project Helios, uninterrupted. Serafina clinked her glass against his, her smile sharp and triumphant. And to clearing out the old guard, it was a mercy, really. She was holding you back, Marcus. She was holding the whole company back. Marcus took a deep, satisfied drink. The brakes department, he chuckled, and Serafina laughed with him. She will be so toxic after this investigation. She will be begging me to buy her shares. You must not, Serafina said, leaning in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Do not offer $1. Let the investigation find her gross negligence. We will invoke the morality clause in her contract. We will get her 50% for nothing. We will seize it. Marcus stared at her, his eyes full of a hungry, dark admiration. Seize it. I like that. Serafina, you are absolutely brilliant and ruthless. We are, she corrected him, placing her hand over his on the white tablecloth. Now, let's talk about the new org chart. My first recommendation is a full audit of the finance department, starting with her personal assistant. Their phones, set on the table, buzzed simultaneously at exactly 1 minute past midnight. They both glanced down, saw the flood of emails with subject lines like Urgent Legal Notification Shareholder Default and Notice of Special Board Action. Marcus sighed, annoyed at the interruption. Hartman's team, probably just dotting the I's on the suspension. It can wait. He silenced his phone, and Serafina did the same. They ordered another bottle. Back at Gable and Stone, the mood was electric. They are sent, the tech analyst confirmed. Just then, the main conference room door opened. Ben Carter stood there, his coat damp from the rain, his face drawn but resolved. He was carrying a heavy-duty, shock-proof hard case. "Ilara," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I brought the server, but I also brought this." He pulled a small, encrypted USB drive from his pocket. I ran a deep recovery protocol on the local drive from Serafina's old workstation, the one she thought was wiped and sent to storage. I looked at him, confused. "She's sloppy," Ben continued, his anger making him shake. "She likes to talk. She accidentally recorded herself 2 weeks ago during a call. She must have hit the record key by mistake and then just deleted the file without checking it." He plugged the drive into the main system, and Hartman's audio-visual team cued the file. Serafina's voice filled the silent million-dollar conference room. It was not her polished, professional tone. This was her bragging, smug, and unguarded. "So easy, it's almost pathetic," her voice echoed, tinged with static. "I just built a simple script to alter the timestamps on his sent items folder. I draft the fake emails, backdate them, and then I just forward them to Marcus's account. He's so eager to believe she's the enemy. He doesn't even question it. By the time I'm done, I will have him convince himself that firing the old, non-visionary hag was his idea all along." The recording clicked off. The entire legal team stared, mouths open. Mrs. Hartman was the first to move. She calmly adjusted her glasses. "Gentlemen," she said to her team, "amend the termination notice for Ms. Hayes. We are no longer firing her. We are having her arrested. Add criminal fraud, wire fraud, and industrial espionage to the list." It was 6 a.m. The sun was just beginning to cast a weak, watery light over Lake Michigan. I had not slept. I had showered, changed, and been reborn. I stood for a moment outside the SLG tower, our name carved into the granite. My name. I was wearing a dark navy blue suit, structured and severe, with a crisp white silk blouse. It was armor. As I pushed through the revolving glass doors, the main lobby was quiet, smelling of floor wax and the faint aroma of coffee from the distant cafe. Mr. Smith, the head of our corporate security, stood near the main elevator bank. He was a good man, ex-military, and he looked deeply uncomfortable. He had, of course, received the email blast from Marcus yesterday afternoon. "Mrs. Vance," he said, stepping into my path, his face a mask of professional regret. "Ma'am, I can't let you up." He was looking at me, but his hand was protectively near the passkey scanner. "My instructions are clear. Your access has been revoked." "I understand. Mr. Smith," I said, my voice calm. "You are simply following your orders." "Ilara," he pleaded, dropping the formality for a moment. "Please don't make me—" "That won't be necessary." The ding of the executive elevator was sharp in the quiet lobby. The steel doors slid open, revealing Mrs. Hartman, flanked by 2 stone-faced lawyers from Gable and Stone, both of whom were carrying thick leather briefcases. Hartman's eyes, sharp and intelligent, landed on the security chief. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Stand aside, Mr. Smith," she said. Her voice was a flat, legal instrument. "As of 12:01 this morning, and in accordance with Clause 11.4 of the company charter which you are paid to protect, Mr. Thorne is no longer the CEO. Mrs. Vance is the controlling shareholder and the new acting chairwoman of Summit Logistics Group. Your instructions from yesterday are null and void." Smith's face went from pale to ghostly. He was a smart man. He knew not to argue with the company's chief legal counsel. He looked at me, then at Hartman, and the tension drained from his shoulders. He stepped back, his posture shifting from guard to employee. "My apologies. Madam Chairwoman," he said, his voice now a stiff baritone. "As you were, Mr. Smith," I said, not unkindly. "But have your best men meet me on the executive floor in 5 minutes. There will be 2 individuals requiring a security escort from the building." "Yes, ma'am," he said, tapping his earpiece. We rode the elevator to the 50th floor in silence. The doors opened onto the hushed, expensive carpet of the executive suite. My suite. I walked past my old office, the glass-walled space of the CFO. I did not even glance at it. I walked straight to the double-doored corner office, the one with the private bathroom and the sweeping, 180-degree view of the city, the one that said Marcus Thorne, CEO, on a brushed steel plaque. I pushed the door open. It was dark, smelling faintly of his expensive, spicy cologne. I hit the lights, and the automated shades slowly rose, flooding the room with the gray morning light. I walked behind the massive, obnoxiously large mahogany desk. His desk. I sat down in the plush, high-backed black leather chair. It was still warm from his body heat of the previous day. I found his personal coffee mug, the one the team had given him, and tossed it into the wastebasket. I then made myself a cup of black coffee from the in-office machine, using a simple, clean ceramic mug. I was sitting there, calmly sipping my coffee and reviewing the injunctions. When he arrived, he came in at precisely 7:30 a.m. He was whistling. I could hear his jaunty, tuneless whistle before I saw him. He burst through the door, his briefcase swinging, a smug, self-satisfied look on his face. "Ben, you useless," he started, assuming I was my own assistant, and then he froze. He stopped so abruptly, he almost stumbled. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated shock. His face cycled through confusion, then anger. He physically could not comprehend the scene. I was sitting in his chair, at his desk. "Ilara," he choked out. "What the hell are you doing, security?" "They're on their way," I said calmly. "You've got some nerve," he sneered, regaining a fraction of his bravado. He dropped his briefcase and stalked toward the desk. "I suspended you. You are trespassing. Get out of my chair before I have you arrested." He leaned over the desk, his hands planted on the polished wood. "Are you here to apologize? Is that it, ready to beg?" "Ready to apologize to Serafina." I took one last, slow sip of the hot coffee. I placed the mug down on the coaster with a quiet, definitive click. "No," I said, looking up and meeting his furious, confused eyes. "I am not, but you should start cleaning out your desk." I paused, glancing around the room at his obnoxious artwork and a signed football. "Or don't," I continued, my voice flat and cold. "Just leave it. I'll have someone clear it out before lunch." Marcus stared at me, his mouth slightly open. Then, he burst out laughing. It was a loud, ugly, barking sound, completely devoid of humor. "Delusional," he wheezed, shaking his head as he clutched his stomach. "You are completely delusional. I suspended you, I did me. This is my company. Ilara, you have no power here." He was still chuckling, wiping a fake tear from his eye, when the door swung open again. "Marcus, what's going on?" Serafina Hayes's voice was sharp, annoyed. She walked in, tapping at her phone. "The board is going crazy. They all got some insane email from Hart." She looked up. Her words died in her throat. She froze, her phone still held aloft, as she took in the scene me, sitting in Marcus's chair, and Marcus, standing opposite me, his face a mask of forced amusement. "Serafina, perfect timing," Marcus sneered, gesturing at me. "Apparently, Ilara here thinks she's staging a coup. Tell her she's fired." "Oh, wait, I already did that." "Marcus, Serafina, please, take a seat." Mrs. Hartman's voice cut through the room like a surgeon's blade. She had entered silently behind Serafina, along with her 2 associates from Gable and Stone. They moved with a chilling efficiency, closing the doors and placing their briefcases on the conference table in the corner of the office. They did not sit. They stood, like sentinels, as Hartman advanced. She was not looking at me. Her entire focus, her legal fiduciary duty, was on the CEO. "What is this, Hartman?" Marcus snapped, his bravado fading into irritation. "You work for me, and I've got a busy day. Get her out of here." "I do not work for you, Marcus," Hartman said, her voice flat. "I work for the company, Summit Logistics Group, and as of this morning, you are in breach of your duties to it. Please, sit." The command was so absolute, so final, that Marcus actually wavered. He looked at Serafina, who was now chalk white, her eyes darting between me and Hartman, slowly, awkwardly. They both sat in the two guest chairs facing the desk. They looked like prisoners. Hartman stood at the head of the desk, between us, a master of ceremonies at an execution. "At approximately 4:15 p.m. yesterday," Hartman began, her voice a monotone, "you, Marcus Thorne, in your capacity as CEO, publicly and summarily suspended the Chief Financial Officer, Alara Vance, in front of the board and external investors." "Damn right I did," Marcus muttered. "She was sabotaging the—" Hartman held up a single, silencing hand. "That action, Mr. Thorne, was a direct and catastrophic violation of the original shareholders' agreement, which you signed 5 years ago upon securing our Series A funding." She gestured to one of the associates, who stepped forward and placed a thick, bound document on the desk in front of Marcus. He then placed a second single sheet of paper next to it. It was the transcript of Marcus's speech from yesterday. "I direct your attention," Hartman continued, "to Clause 11.4, the Fiduciary Breach and Control Transfer Clause." "What?" Serafina whispered, leaning forward. "What clause? A clause," Hartman said, her eyes boring into Marcus, "stipulating that because Mrs. Vance is the sole personal financial guarantor for the company's $20 million primary credit line, her role as CFO is considered an inextricable asset to the company's financial stability. As such, any attempt to remove her from that role without a mandatory 30-day arbitration hearing constitutes a gross fiduciary breach by the CEO." Marcus was no longer laughing. His face was losing its color. That's legal nonsense. A technicality." "It is a binding covenant," Hartman corrected him, "and the consequences for that breach are automatic and non-reversible. The clause was designed to protect the company's assets from, as it is written, compromised and negligent leadership." Hartman's associate stepped forward again, placing a third document on the desk. It was a formal letter from the bank, confirming my status as the sole guarantor. "Evidence A, your public declaration of suspension," Hartman said, tapping the transcript. "Evidence B, the binding shareholder agreement you signed. Evidence C, the bank's confirmation of the guarantor status that underpins the clause." She folded her hands. The room was so quiet I could hear the blood pounding in my own ears. "The breach occurred. The penalty was triggered. As of 12:01 a.m. this morning, per the agreement you signed, all 50% of your voting shares in Summit Logistics Group have been nullified and their ownership permanently transferred to the guarantor, Mrs. Alara Vance." She paused, letting the words sink into the dead air. "She now holds 100% of the company. You, Mr. Thorne, hold 0. Marcus's face was a terrible sight. It was white, then purple, then white again. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He was gasping, like a fish pulled from water. "No," he finally stammered, his voice a strangled whisper. "No, it's a trick. It's just paper. You can't do that." He looked at me, his eyes wide with a desperate animal panic. "Ilara, this is insane." I leaned forward in my new chair. I looked at the man who had tried to destroy me, the man who had laughed at me, the man who was now a guest in my office. "You signed it," I said, my voice cold and final, "and you violated it." Serafina, who had been frozen in a state of silent shock, suddenly sprang to life. The color rushed back to her face in angry, red blotches. She stood up so fast her chair almost toppled over. "This is absurd," she yelled, her voice breaking. "This is a procedural trick. It doesn't matter. The suspension was valid." She jabbed a finger at me, her hand shaking. She sabotaged Project Helios. I can prove it. I have the emails. I have the proof that she was deliberately delaying payments to torpedo the expansion. She was making a last desperate gamble, appealing to the idea of justice she thought still applied. She thought her forged evidence was her shield. Marcus, hearing this, looked up, a flicker of insane hope in his eyes. Yes, the email's Hartman. The suspension was for cause. This clause, it doesn't apply if she committed malfeasance. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. I looked past them, toward the closed door of the office. I smiled. A small, cold smile. Mrs. Hartman, I said, my voice smooth. You will find this next part particularly relevant to the company's legal standing. I raised my voice slightly. Ben, you can come in now. The office door opened, and Ben Carter walked in. He was not carrying a server this time. He just held his phone. He looked calm, his gaze fixed on Serafina with a quiet, righteous fury. What is this? Serafina snapped. What is her assistant doing here? Ben, I said. If you would. Ben did not say a word. He pressed a button on his phone and set it on the polished mahogany desk. A voice filled the room. It was Serafina's voice, but not the one she used in the boardroom. This was her bragging, smug, and unguarded. So easy it's almost pathetic, the recording of her voice said, echoing in the dead silence. I just built a simple script to alter the timestamps on his sent items folder. I draft the fake emails, backdate them, and then I just forward them to Marcus's account. He's so eager to believe she's the enemy. He doesn't even question it. He's a fool. By the time I'm done, I will have him convince himself that firing the old non-visionary hag was his idea all along. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum. Marcus looked at the phone, then at Serafina, his expression a grotesque mask of dawning horror. Serafina's face was no longer red. It was a waxy, bloodless white. She looked like a ghost. Her mouth was open, but no sound was coming out. She stared at the phone as if it were a snake that had just bitten her. Mrs. Hartman was the first to move. She calmly adjusted her glasses and turned her body 100% to face Serafina. Her voice was not angry. It was the voice of a judge passing sentence. Ms. Hayes, Hartman said, you are terminated. For cause. Effective immediately. She gestured to the lawyers by the door, who were already dialing. Security will escort you from the premises. Your personal effects will be mailed to you after a full forensic audit of your devices. Hartman took a step closer, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. And you should know, we will be cooperating fully with the U.S. Attorney's Office. The charges will include, but are not limited to, criminal fraud, wire fraud, and industrial espionage. I suggest you retain counsel. That was when Marcus finally broke. He saw his last tiny foothold crumble into dust. He did not yell. He did not fight. He did the last, most pathetic thing he could. He turned to me, his eyes wide and wet. He lunged forward, not to attack, but to plead. Ilara, he whispered, his voice cracking. Baby. Oh God. This is a terrible misunderstanding. He gestured wildly at Serafina, who was now trembling, staring at the floor. It was her. It was all her. You heard it. She tricked me. She manipulated me. She seduced me. Ilara. She preyed on me. She fed me lies. I never meant for any of this to happen. He was trying to use our life together, our history, as his final shield. He was trying to crawl back into my heart to save his skin. Please, he begged, tears now openly streaming down his face. Ilara, you, he said, using the old Vietnamese term of endearment he knew I loved. It was always you. Let me fix this. We can fix this. Just fire her. We'll fire her together. We can go back to how it was. I looked at him, I looked at this broken, weeping man, the shell of the partner I had loved, the architect of my deepest humiliation. The rage was gone. The hurt was gone. All I felt was a vast, cold emptiness. I stood up from my chair, the chair he thought he could use to beg me. "No, Marcus," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through his sobs. "It wasn't a misunderstanding. You made your choice." I looked from his tear-stained face to Seraphina's ashen, broken one. "You chose her. You believed her, a stranger, over your wife of 7 years. You chose her ambition over our history, and you just lost everything for it." The cold, logical part of my brain was done. The part that was pure, righteous fury took over. Marcus, my husband, was on his knees. He was literally, pathetically, on his knees on the expensive carpet, his hands clasped in front of him, sobbing. "Alara, no," he begged, his voice a hideous, wet sound. "Please, Alara, you cannot take the company. You cannot take my company. It is everything I have. It's my life." His words were so selfish, so utterly blind, that a laugh, cold and sharp, almost escaped me. I crushed it. "It was built on my money," I said, my voice like a razor. "My $2 million started it. My $20 million guarantee saved it. And you tried to throw me out of the very house I built, with my own hands, just to sleep with a thief. It won't happen again," he pleaded, crawling forward an inch on his knees. "I'll do anything." "Yes, you will," I said. Mrs. Hartman, seeing her cue, stepped forward. Her associate placed the final stack of papers on the desk, right in front of where Marcus was kneeling. "These are the final instruments," Hartman said, her voice impassive. "A full and final transfer of all ownership and control rights to Mrs. Vance, effective immediately. And your formal resignation as CEO, citing personal reasons." Marcus stared at the papers as if they were his death warrant. His hands were shaking so violently he could not even reach for them. He was completely, utterly broken. I looked at the desk, at the clutter he had left, and I saw it. The heavy, gold-nibbed Mont Blanc pen I had given him for our 3rd anniversary. The one engraved with our summit. I picked it up. It was heavy in my hand. Then, I tossed it. It landed on the resignation papers in front of him with a heavy, final thud. His eyes shot up, full of terror and disbelief. "Sign it, Marcus," I said, my voice low and final. "Sign it right now, or we can take a different path. We can go to court. We can let this drag out for months. And in that time, I will make sure that the audio recording of Ms. Hayes, your sworn affidavit admitting to your breach of fiduciary duty, and the detailed expense reports of your affair are made public. I will not just take this company. I will destroy your name in Chicago so thoroughly. You will not be able to get a loan for a cup of coffee." I gave him 1 second. 2. He knew. He knew he was checkmated. There was no move left on the board. The king was dead. A sound, a low, animal whimper, escaped his throat. With a hand that trembled so hard he could barely hold the pen, he uncapped it. He bent over the desk, his body hunched in defeat, and he signed his name. He signed away his title. He signed away his shares. He signed away our life. He dropped the pen as if it had burned him. I stood up, straightening the jacket of my suit. I felt nothing. No, that's a lie. I felt cold, and I felt free. "Now," I said, turning to the intercom on the desk. I pressed the button. "Security." The door opened almost instantly. Mr. Smith and his 2 largest security officers stepped inside. They took in the scene me, standing behind the desk, Seraphina, who was practically catatonic in her chair, and Marcus, still on his knees with professional neutrality. "Ma'am," Smith asked. I pointed, not at Marcus, but at both of them. "Escort both of these individuals out of my building. They are to leave with nothing but what they are wearing. Their access is revoked. permanently. Have them wait in the lobby for their personal effects, which will be sent down in a box. Serafina did not move. One of the guards had to tap her on the shoulder, and she let out a small, terrified squeak. Marcus! Marcus just stayed on his knees, his head bowed, until the guards physically lifted him by the arms. He did not resist. He was empty. I watched them get dragged out of the office, 2 pieces of trash being taken to the curb. The door clicked shut, and the office was silent. I stood there for a long time, just breathing. The silence was mine. The company was mine. The victory was mine. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, the ones that had always been his. I looked out over the city of Chicago, the cars moving like blood cells through the arteries of the streets, the whole, vast, busy world spread out below me. It was all so clear. I turned back to the desk, my desk, and pressed the intercom. "Ben," I said. His voice came on instantly, clear and steady. "Yes, Ilara, I'm right here. Call an all-hands meeting for the entire company, in 1 hour," I said. Tell them there are going to be some big changes. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. I am so curious to know where in the world you are listening from. So please let me know in the comments and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video. And if you want to support us, please hit that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.